very good experience to find yourself being told that you're not quite there yet on 680, so you keep on going, and you end up in San Jose. And then you turn around and try to rush back. But somehow the Lord got us here. Everything that could have been thrown against us on the road was car trouble and everything else, so we're very grateful to be here. I kept saying over and over as I prayed going down the road that this had to be something tonight, some type of fantastic meeting, because usually when we're this well fought getting to a place, something's going to take place. So I came in expecting something. I'm sure you were expecting to leave as late as it is. But if you must go, as they said, go ahead. Otherwise, bear with me. I'll try not to keep you too long. The only complaint that my pastor has against me is that I'm long-winded. And the only complaint that another pastor had last Sunday night was that I wasn't long-winded enough. He wanted to go to 11. And I promised not to keep you that late. But anyway, I don't fool around, so I'll just start right out. I can only make you one promise that what I've got to say is the truth. It won't seem that way to some of you. It'll just seem that I'm either crazy or I'm the biggest liar and storyteller in the world. That's what our televisions have done to us. They've gotten us to a plane of mind that we do not realize the real world around us. When I talk in many youth rallies, many of the Christian schools, I start right out by tearing their television and rock idols down by personal experiences that I've had with them in the occult world. And then from there we try to build them up with real heroes, the number one being Jesus Christ. But I come from a family where I grew up having my own heroes. My number one hero was my great, somewhere way back there, grandfather named Francis Collins. Francis Collins owned the first ship that the Puritans landed in here. It just so happened that 50% of the people on board were also witchcraft people fleeing from Scotland. And they were called the Collinses. They were all his family, and that's how all witchcraft came to the United States. So when I grew up, I was being trained how great my family was, that it was the second most important family in the Illuminati in the occult world, and that someday I'd be very important and so on. So I had my own heroes. And television didn't help much. The reason I'm so down on television is I grew up around the television world, on the insides of it. When I was just a teenager, Hollywood paid for my way out to California so that I could bring a couple diaries that belonged to my family that I had inherited by will as the last male heir of the Collins family. If you wondered why that fits with Todd's, the Collins family changed their name about 100 years ago to Todd to cover up some of the things that they had done. But I'm sure some of you will remember the show Dark Shadows. That was the show that paid for me to come to Hollywood to bring the diaries. Many of the scripts were taken from actual incidences in the diaries. And for instance, Barnabas Collins was based upon a man named Francis Williams Collins, a Revolutionary War hero. When I was growing up in the occult world, we were always taught that we had been somebody else before. It wasn't good enough that we were the person we were now. We always had to be a dozen people that we were before. We had to deal with this life and all the ones we were supposed to have had before and all the ones we were going to have in the future. And I was supposed to be in Francis Williams Collins. So I said that's who they based Barnabas on, so I wasn't exactly the nicest guy in the world. I grew up this way. When I was 13, I was taken into what is called the outer court to be trained as a priest in witchcraft. That had been like your pastor who just stepped off, or better yet, more like the youth director or something. When I was 18, I was initiated a high priest. That would have made me the pastor. At the same time, I became draft exempt. I did not have to go into service, but a bunch of us smart-aleck young, I have to correct the pastor, not warlocks, but wizards and witches, went into the Army because we felt the Army really needed witchcraft. It just couldn't get along without us. And since the Army didn't think that they needed any chaplains that were witches, we just kind of went in on our own. So I went on in, along with a lot of others, and I never did anything, I guess, halfway. I got in Vietnam, found out I liked Vietnam so well, I was willing to re-enlist. In fact, I'd already signed the papers to stay for another tour in Vietnam when I became wounded in the last month of the first tour, and I was shipped back to the United States. My time was almost up, so I was discharged, and the same day I re-enlisted. I asked for Vietnam, and they said because of my wounds that hadn't totally healed yet, I couldn't go to Vietnam yet, so I got Germany. And I had re-enlisted for 6 years. And until the time of my re-enlistment, I always thought that witchcraft was just witchcraft. There was nothing more to witchcraft than just casting spells, and that we were smarter than the Christians and other religions because we really knew who the gods were, and we were born with special powers because our ancestors had passed them down to us, and all the little stories they like to tell us. Witchcraft was a little different at that time. When I first got into it as a young person, you had to be from a family that had generations after generations of witchcraft. In order to be a coven member at the time, you had to have 3 generations at least, while the minimum that I had that we could find was 7. So there wasn't any problem, and we knew it went past that where there weren't records kept anymore. But that was all witchcraft was. As I tell many people, when many of you were raised as Christians, and I guess that's why I can't understand why some of the Christian teenagers are the way they are today. If they were raised in this glorious gospel, why they're so rebellious. I would have given anything to have been raised this way. But when you were learning the 23rd Psalm, I was learning the witches' chant. When you were reading about Moses opening the Red Sea, I was reading J.R.R. Tolkien. When you guys were learning different memory verses and so on, and the 4 spiritual laws and the 10 commandments, I was happening to read C.S. Lewis. Of course, I've been greatly surprised that Christians read that too. But this is the way I grew up, and this is all I believed in, was just that there were mighty gods and we were spatial people. We were their priests and priestesses until I re-enlisted. I went to Germany, spent a month home, went to Germany, spent another month. 2 months out of a 6-year enlistment. One night while taking drugs and drinking, I shot and killed an officer in downtown Stuttgart. Now, if there's one thing that the Army does not like, it does not like its sergeants killing its officers. They have a quick cure for that. They threw me in solitary confinement. And as the court-martial proceeded on, and things began to look like I was going to spend the rest of my life in Leavenworth if I was lucky, all of a sudden a riot took place in the stockade, and although I was in solitary confinement, other people were placed in the cell with me. One of the men that was placed in the cell with me had been scheduled to get out that particular day and was held because of the riot. So I kind of talked him in by bribing him a little that if he made a long-distance phone call for me and told certain relatives of mine that I was in trouble, he'd receive some money for it and I'd be a lot happier. So he called collect to Los Angeles and talked to my foster mother, explained what the situation was. And I was sitting back waiting for her to get all these big witches together to cast spells on the judges and make all the officers that were trying me think I was a real nice guy and that it was self-defense and everything was going to be fine. They'd just let me off. Now that's all that I had ever been taught that witches could do. But 3 days later, my cell door opened there in solitary. As I stepped out in the light for the first time in 32 days, I heard some very strange words. You are honorably discharged from the United States Army. And the man that was saying them was a senator by the name of William Saxby. He had a congressman with him named Wiley and about 3 or 4 generals, and they were handing me an honorable discharge. And on the discharge papers, it didn't say I was bad, didn't say that I had been in jail, didn't say anything. It gave me all my time and rank, security clearances that I had in my possession, and didn't explain why I still had over 5 years to go in the United States Army. It just discharged me honorably. So I took it and didn't want to argue with him and left and went back to the States and arrived at my home in Columbus, Ohio. I asked my real mother, I have 2 mothers, foster mother and a real mother. I said, what type of spell is so good that it makes senators and generals do what you want? And it's a really good spell. I'd like to learn it. She just looked at me and said, you just don't understand, do you? She said, we didn't cast a spell on them. They're with us. I said, oh, far out. Senators that are witches. She says, no, they just belong to us. And I didn't understand what she was saying. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do now? You know, I'd like to take my old coven back over and so on. So she handed me an envelope that had been waiting there. She had explained that there was one there and one in Los Angeles. They didn't quite know where I was going to show up. I opened the envelope. Very intriguing thing. $2,000 in $100 bills. A lot of money. Also was a one-way plane ticket to New York City. I said, well, what's this for? She said, well, you make a reservation, you get on the next plane, you get out of here and you get to New York City and they'll meet you at the airport. I said, well, who are they? And where did this money come from? She says, you get there and they'll tell you and you'll know who's supposed to meet you when you get there. Now, witches are very curious people. That's why when we do some of the most demonic rites imaginable and our hair would stand on end and almost turn snow white overnight from all the spooky things, we couldn't wait to get back in there. We were always curious what was going to happen the next. I think that's why some of the people get on roller coasters and like to be scared to death. It's just the way with the witches. They really spooky things going on, and they can't wait to get back, and this was extremely intriguing. So I got on the plane, and I flew to New York, and I got off the plane. Sure enough, no problem with recognizing who met me. I'd read his books for years. In fact, he's the man who first created Christian witchcraft. His name was Dr. Raymond Buckland, head of the anthropology department, Columbia University. At that time, he isn't now. Graduate of Oxford University, Rhodes Scholar, handpicked by the Rothschilds to lead the Illuminati for him. So I arrived, and he took me to his house, and the next few months he carefully rearranged all my ideas for me. He told me that all the things that I had learned about witchcraft were just stories that we told the lower people. And where I thought there was only 3 levels and I was as high and as powerful as a witch could go, he assured me there were 3 more. I guess I should have backed off then, figured if I was lied to the first time, maybe I'd be lied to the second time. But as I said, witches have an incurable curiosity. They've got to find out everything. So I let him train me, and he explained to me that since I was a male Collins, I was in the Collins family, that I had a position to take. And that there was a board of directors called the Grand Druid Council, which contained 13 of the most powerful witches in the world. And that my place was on that council. And I said, oh, great. When do I take it? And he said, well, somebody just died. I kind of always wondered if he died or they shot him or something. You never can tell in the Illuminati. But he sent me to Los Angeles. I studied for 6 more months with my foster mother, holding kind of a temporary rank on this council, and then taking up to Colorado Springs and initiated. And I do believe that when I testified here at the last time, I explained who the person was that handed me the ceremonial knife for that ceremony, another senator named George McGovern. You might, before the night gets over, start to realize that Washington isn't bad as you thought it was. It's worse. But the ceremony, by the way, was human sacrifice. And the leader of that ceremony that night was George McGovern. That's why when we did the broken cross, we drew his picture into the broken cross as a person practicing human sacrifice. But after the ceremony, I went down to San Antonio and decided that would be the perfect place. And I moved into San Antonio to watch all the drug traffic in the area, and I was given a 13-state area. That totaled out to about 65,000 initiated witches and wizards, priests and priestesses. Now that's just the staff of the church. That's not the congregation. So if there's that many ministers in that area, you can imagine what the population is. In California, whereas most of the Grand Druids have many states like I did, I had 13, California has a Grand Druid all to itself because there's that many witches in California. In fact, it's the most populated area in the world for witchcraft. And the Bay Area just happens to have the most. But anyway, this is where I lived. I only left it 8 times a year to attend what we called council meetings. Now, to give you an idea, Monday was one of those council meetings. They hold them 8 times a year. May 1st, they held a council meeting, and from our information, they held it in San Francisco. So you were kind of close to it this time. Things went along fine. I enjoyed the money, par. I always thought they were kind of weird because they kept talking about controlling the world. And I thought, let's stay back with witchcraft, this world government thing, they're a little weird. Witches are never going to control the world. And finally, on August the 1st, 1972, things changed. Courier from the London Embassy, a member of our United States State Department, arrived with a courier document pouch sealed with the crest of the State Department, brought it through customs, unopened, nobody could touch it, brought it in to San Antonio, and I was hosting the meeting this time. And it was on Latimus, August the 1st. The man came in, laid the pouch down in the temple room up in the casino building, walked out, and left it. He wasn't to know what was in it. The door was locked, security guards were placed on the outside, and Dr. Buckland took up what's called the Atom-8, the witch's ceremonial knife. He slit open the seal, unlocked everything, and took out 6 letters. We'd seen letters like this before, no big deal. They had the crest of the Illuminati, which is on the back of your $1 bill, so you can look at it later. On them, sealed in wax, red wax. The only problem was that the first 4 were standard business. They only contain checks, bribe checks and so on. Usually bribe checks start at about $500,000 to give you kind of an idea and work up into the millions. But then they've got almost all the money in the world. Why should they worry? You spend a $5 bill and you panic. For what a $5 bill feels like to you, $1 million feels like to them. So believe me, they've got the financial strength to do it. The fifth one was totally different. It's very thick, about 30 pages, and it was handwritten. Now, according to the laws of witchcraft, if anything is religious, it must be written in a special ink with a dip pen, and the person who's writing it own handwriting. Nobody, you don't dictate it. It doesn't get typed up. Nobody writes it for you. Now, in the Illuminati, the Rothschilds are not humans. They're not just the richest family in the world. They are gods in human bodies. More or less the counterfeit of what Jesus Christ was when he was on the earth. They're the sons and daughters of Lucifer in human body, and his wife and so on. So that this council that I was on is the private priesthood of those gods. And when those gods talk, the priests listen and the priestesses listen. Then they tell political people. That's why a handful of witches have so much power over so many political people. Because they're simply just like a tape recorder for some very powerful people that everybody else considers to be holy and to be gods. So we opened this one in Philip Rothschild's handwriting, and it would have been the same to what it was like, the gods sent their own private message. So we opened it up. Dr. Buckland started reading it. It's a chart. A friend of mine, Dr. Tom Berry, has placed that chart in a 30-page book, and we're proofing it now, and Dr. Stuart Crane is going to publish it, and we hope to have it in Christians' hands in about 3 months. It's a step-by-step plan beginning in 1973, at the first of the year, to the end of 1980, to take over the world by taking over the United States. Now, before you think that that's impossible, I've watched the news over the past 5.5 years, and they're not only on schedule, they're a year ahead of schedule. And when I told people this 5 years ago, they thought I was crazy, like a lot of people think now. When I told them that we were supposedly not going to have any fuel, although we were going to have it, and that the gasoline prices were going to go sky high, I even told them a crazy story that the farmers were going to go on strike and the coal mines were going to close down. Now, I wonder where I could have gotten a crazy idea like that. And I was saying it 5 years ago. Only when I went on the East Coast this time, nobody was laughing because they were getting cut back on electricity, and people were only working 20 hours a week because there wasn't any coal. So after reading this, I thought, these people are really crazy, crazier and crazier. But I stopped laughing when I read the sixth letter. It was in Philip Rothschild's handwriting, too. Now, before I tell you what's in it, I want to say something. The Mormon doctrine and the witchcraft doctrine are almost identical in how the world began. According to the witches, Lucifer chose his son and his daughter, which were married, to come to the world and lead the rest of his little kids down here. Believe it or not, they're supposed to have landed in a flying saucer. And they landed here, and man was just more or less assuming their shape from apes, and they intermarried with man, and that's how, the original people were the witches that arrived, and their children became the witches, and the ones that they didn't marry with are the mortals. If you remember Bewitched, you remember the doctrine of witches and mortals. Now, that may seem a little crazy to you, but they firmly believe it. And that Adam, who had the ability to turn back into other lives again, like everybody else did not. Because when the evilness of man settled into the garden, and that's why the garden was bad, there's no original sin according to witches. And Lucifer had planned to come and live on this world along with his children, but he couldn't because of all the evilness of man. And when they say that, I almost feel like they want to write Christians sometimes, the way the doctrine goes. But Adam would come back to bring peace to the world and to unpollute it so his father could come back. Now, that's their doctrine. And when the sixth letter said, we have found Adam to be in the world, and he is ready to make peace so that his father can return, I knew enough about revelations in the Christian Bible to say, hey, I'm in the wrong camp. And I asked a very stupid question at that moment. I said, isn't this in the Christian Bible? Now, witches teach that the Christian Bible is an absolute lie, created by the god of evil named Jesus. Okay? So when I asked that, I almost got lynched. Sometimes more or less like the Christians like to do when I'm 2 hours late. I got to get you to laugh somehow. So I said, well, you know, I'm just kidding. Don't worry about it. I was just joking, trying to lighten things up. They calmed down. I left, did some more drugs. Now, I was doing about $150 a day worth of crystal speed at the time. I weighed about 149 pounds, and after looking at some of my rock friends like David Crosby that's doing $200 a day worth of drugs now, I firmly believe that if the Lord hadn't saved me, I probably wouldn't have made it another year. At that time, from August the 1st on, for the next 30 days, I thought of nothing but how to get out. But even though I realized that the Christian Bible was telling the truth, it just never dawned on me because of the spirits inside me that if it was telling the truth in that, then salvation and Calvary were real also. So I went on trying to think of a dozen places I could go hide in this world and marking every one off that they'd find me any place I'd go, and deciding that since, you know, if I died, I'd just come back in another life, and that wouldn't be too good if they were running the world, so what was I going to do? Finally, God, Lord Jesus Christ, I want to say that because I come from a world that Lucifer has been God too. Finally, the Lord Jesus Christ started moving for this, the best way I know how to put it. I don't believe in accidents. I don't believe that my salvation or anybody else's salvation was an accident. I believe in God infinite. I believe that God sets in motion the things to bring you about. You still have the choice. But many of you who don't know him tonight, the Lord brought you here whether you know it or not. Much of you were probably brought here by praying friends and relatives. A man found his daughter, a pastor by the name of Smith, found his daughter, an initiated witch, shortly thereafter, he told me later, he said, I couldn't believe it. Here I went to Baylor University, I was a minister in the Southern Baptist Church, and Baylor did everything but hit me over the head that there was no devil and no witches and no demons in this day and age, much like many fundamental Bible colleges I know today. He said, so I had to relearn all over again. Instead of taking man's idea, I took the Word of God. I found that Deuteronomy 18, 18, 19, and 20 gave a list of witchcraft in the occult world, and that Acts 16, 16, 17, 18, and 19 gave the power over witchcraft, what its power was, and how to handle its power and the power over it, which is the taking authority over the devil and the demons that are in witches. That's how they get their power. The stronger the witch, the more demons that they have allowed in. When they take a young person and they train them for witchcraft, they give them what lovingly, I guess, called homework. They give them assignments that they're to do, and the assignments tear down every moral fiber and training that the person has, and just literally they become a human chalice. They fill up with demons. As they do these things, they break down all the barriers holding the devil back, and when they're done, they have a very programmed, very brainwashed, and very powerful supernatural witch or wizard. So he prayed and he fasted. I heard Jack Howes the other day. I guess I never realized until I heard him how little Christians pray and fast. He's been around a long time and says he's only met a handful of praying and fasting Christians, and I can believe it anymore. But this minister prayed and he fasted. He said, God, let me cross Lance Collins' path. And that was my occult name. He prayed and he prayed, and finally he felt this is the time, and he got up one morning, Saturday morning, a few days before Labor Day in 1972, and he went downtown and he started going through the occult stores. Now, was never in the occult stores there much. And the one building that I lived in, there were 2 occult stores in that building, downtown San Antonio. One day, one of the managers that Saturday morning had an overdose of drugs, was critical and couldn't make it in, and I had to go unlock the place for the sales girl to come in. And I just unlocked, got all the cash fixed up and everything, was getting ready to leave, hadn't been there more than about 5 minutes, and his pastor came in. Now, I knew he was a Baptist the moment he walked through the door. He carried a big black Bible. You have to be in southern Texas to understand. They don't go any place without a big black Thompson or something like that. He carries Schofields up here, they carry Thompsons down there. As one pastor says, I like a rapid-fire Bible. But he came in, and I remember telling Linda, the girl that was with me, oh boy, here comes trouble. He walked up and he said, I'm looking for Lance Collins, and kind of braced myself, and I said, I'm Lance Collins, can I help you? And he said, well, I want to tell you about the love of Jesus. I said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. You take your Christian garbage and you go somewhere else. I remember the words very distinct. So he started preaching anyway. They figured he was there. He just dug his heels in and opened up. Well, I gave him about 2 sentences, and the spirits in me took over, and they started cussing. He just kept on preaching. So I started reciting chants, demonic chants, out to block what he was doing. Usually it got Christians scared, and they ran off. He didn't budge. He stopped, and he said, well, I see, Ephesians 6:12. I'm not warring against Lance Collins. I'm warring against the demons inside him. So, since they want to talk to me, I order them to be silent in the name of Jesus. And he just started in a very powerful prayer, pleading the blood of Jesus Christ, and finally ending with this. He says, I order, in the name of Jesus, the devil to stop giving you any power of witchcraft, and to stop giving you any of his benefits, and took one look at me and saw that I was on drugs and said, and stop giving you drugs. Now, parents, listen to me. If your kids are on drugs and you've got a problem, stop preaching to them. Just order the demon inside them and the devil to stop supplying them the drugs. You'd be surprised, we've done it, how fast the pushers and dealers they're getting their drugs from get busted all of a sudden. Try it. It works. And when he was done, he says, now I'm going to pray and fast for you, Lance, until you get saved. And I don't know why I said it. I just said, you're crazy. Get out of here. Don't do that. Don't do that. I remember I've told dozens of witches, I'm going to pray and fast till you get saved. Don't do that. One thing a demon does not like is prayer and fasting. He turned around. He walked off. One thing that had intrigued me, I kept trying to convince myself that I had shut up to listen to him because he was so weird. But what it was simply he had taken authority over the demons, and I had shut up, and I had heard the whole thing. I went on upstairs, very shaken and not knowing why, very sick and not knowing why. I'd never felt like this in my life. I'd never come up against a Christian like this. Usually I said, I'm a witch, and they couldn't wait to find the nearest bomb shelter or crawl under the bed or get the straitjacket out. Well, something about my eyes back then, they never questioned when I said I was a witch. They just took off running. So I went upstairs, took out my drugs, my needle, did a fix. No problem. I had sent all the rest of my drugs out that night, big shipments that we had stored around the area, to other states because we had a huge shipment coming in that night. I said, boy, this will teach that dumb preacher. I ought to go over and drop off a kilo of it on his door just to teach him that the devil doesn't exist and I don't get my drugs from the devil and he can't stop me from getting drugs. Besides, there's nothing wrong with drugs. I'm just literally dying, eating away from them. There's nothing wrong with drugs. This is how the young people are today. Their friends are overdosing. I've talked with people, 14 and 15. I said, how many friends do you lose every year? Oh, 10, 20. They overdose on angel dust or something, killer weed, different things. But there's nothing wrong with drugs. I had asked one girl why she was so bummed out. She says, well, this is the 5th girlfriend that's ended up in the mental hospital not knowing who she is from taking acid and having a bad trip. I said, do you take it? She says, sure, but I don't have any bad trips. There's nothing wrong with acid. When I got saved, I didn't have a friend that either wasn't in jail or wasn't dead. It'll do you something to you to walk into your friend's apartment and see them laying on the floor, needles still in their veins, and dead from an overdose, or from strychnine being added to the drug because they wanted them out of the way. I went on upstairs, as I said, I did the drug. Not to worry, more drugs coming in. Except midnight, my phone rang, and I was still speeding. I hardly ever slept, hardly ever ate. Answered the phone, and I said, yeah, what's going on? Private number, I knew it had to be somebody that knew it. And they told me a story that I didn't like too well. We had paid off the Border Patrol. Everything was taken care of, standard run of drugs. Except that night, the ATF had heard that some illegal aliens were coming across the border. They called all the Border Patrol over, from the regular stations, and had put on reserve units. And a guy that was so spaced out, he had sampled a little of pure speed. There was 3 huge cartons about this big, close to $1 million worth of speed, in the back of the car, just sitting on the back seat with the lid off where everybody could see it. He wasn't worried. Drove up to the thing, and the guy wheels out a gun and says, you're under arrest. It's all over in a matter of moments. I'm sure he never even realized what happened. It was all because a preacher took authority over the devil. When I got that call, come flooding back. You know, this guy's weird. You know, here he is stopping my drugs. And I said, no, that's just an accident. But it never had happened before.